The machines were the only ones still arguing that Kang Tae-jun was alive. 3 days after a bullet meant for a rival syndicate's courier had instead found him at a shipping yard he shouldn't have been standing in, he lay in the penthouse recovery suite of Seoul's most private hospital, chest rising only because a ventilator forced it to, his brain scans showing a flat, dark silence where a mind used to be. "There is no cortical activity," Dr. An said, not looking at the man in the bed, only at the two people standing beside it. "No response to any stimulus. The brain stem shows no function."
"I'm sorry."
"For all practical purposes, he's already gone." Jun's jaw tightened until the muscle stood out like a cord under his skin. He had served Tae-jun for 11 years, and he looked at the doctor as though the man himself were the injury. "So, what happens now?" "We can maintain organ function for family to make arrangements. 24 hours. After that, we begin withdrawing care." No one argued. There was nothing left to argue with. It wasn't a diagnosis, it was a countdown, and everyone in the room understood the difference. 3 floors down, at the nurse's station of the general ward, Naomi Carter was starting a shift she'd picked up to cover a tuition payment she was still $400 short of. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the penthouse level. That floor had its own private staff, its own rules, its own silence that money bought. But the charge nurse was short-handed and desperate, and Naomi had never once in 4 years said no to a shift she could physically stand through. "I need someone on 12 tonight," the charge nurse said, sliding a folder across the desk without looking up. "Monitoring only. No active care required." Everyone on the floor knew what that meant. You were being sent to watch a dying man breathe until the machines were told to stop. "I'll go," Naomi said, because the extra hours would cover what the tuition letter demanded, and because somewhere underneath the practical math there was a stubborn, unexamined belief that no one should spend their last hours on a monitor with nobody in the room who actually looked at them. The suite was cold and smelled of antiseptic laid over something more expensive, cedar, maybe, or a cologne no one had thought to wash off him yet. City lights moved across the walls in slow, shifting patterns. 2 of his men sat in the corner, silent, watching her the way men watch something they don't yet know whether to trust. She ignored them. She checked the numbers the machines gave her. Heart rate, oxygen, respiration, all technically stable, all meaningless because the body was working and the person, by every measure medicine had, was gone. But she found herself looking at his face anyway. He looked younger asleep than she imagined he looked awake. There were faint lines of exhaustion around his eyes even now, a stubborn set to his jaw that hadn't relaxed even in total surrender. Not a monster.
A man.
Someone's brother. Someone's son. Around 3 in the morning, when the hospital had gone as quiet as it ever got, she pulled a stool close to the bed because the silence in that room felt too final, too loud to sit inside of without saying something back to it. "It's a clear night," she said, glancing toward the window. "You can see the bridge from here. The lights on it are gold tonight. Sometimes they run them white, but gold's better." She didn't know why she was saying it to a man who couldn't hear it. She said it anyway, the way she always talked through a code, half to steady her own hands, half because her grandmother used to say hearing was the last thing to leave a body, and some stubborn, unscientific corner of her had never stopped believing it. She hummed without noticing, an old hymn her grandmother used to sing over the stove, the same tune that rose in her chest every time a heart stopped under her hands, automatic as breathing. She talked about the terrible coffee in the break room, about a stray cat she'd seen the week before, about the ocean she'd never actually seen in person and kept meaning to. "Stay with me," she said eventually, quiet, more habit than instruction. The same 3 words she said over every failing heartbeat she'd ever worked. "Even if you can't hear me, stay with me anyway." Her shift was supposed to end at 7. By 5, exhaustion had become a physical weight pressing her shoulders down. She rested her arms on the edge of the mattress, her chin against her hands, and looked at his hand lying open on the sheet, strong, long-fingered, the hand of a man who had probably signed things that built fortunes and probably also signed things that ended lives. She didn't reach for it to be tender. She reached for it because 4 years of nights like this had taught her that touch sometimes did what monitors couldn't, and because for one unguarded moment she let herself want, More than anything, for it not to be true that nobody was in there anymore. She meant to rest her eyes for a second. She woke to warmth. Not the room's warmth, his. Her cheek was against his chest, rising and falling with the ventilator's borrowed rhythm, and under her ear, faint but unmistakable, something that hadn't been there hours ago, his own breath, fighting the machines. She sat up too fast, heart hammering, professional shame flooding in before anything else. I fell asleep on a patient, and then she saw his eyes. Open. Barely. Fixed on her. The monitor's rhythm shifted pitch behind her, a small mechanical gasp of disbelief keeping pace with the room's. He's awake. One of the guards said into his collar, already moving. Get Doctor on. Now. Within minutes the suite filled with a storm of controlled chaos. Doctor on shouting his name, shining a light into eyes that tracked it left to right when medicine had said they wouldn't. Nurses reading numbers that contradicted a chart already stamped with a verdict. Naomi backed against the far wall, trying to make herself small in a room that had suddenly become the center of something enormous. Through all of it, his eyes never left her.
He tried to speak.
Nothing came but a dry rasp, 3 days of intubation stealing his voice, but his gaze held hers with an intensity that made her feel, absurdly, that whatever he was trying to say had her name somewhere inside it. If a man coming back from the dead has your attention already, imagine what happens once he learns her name. Hit subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming. June arrived at a dead run, and behind him, moving slower, more composed, more shaken than she'd ever admit in public, Tae-jun's sister, Ji-hae, silk suit still perfect even at 5 a.m, one tear tracing down a face that hadn't cracked once in 3 days of countdowns. Nobody in that room noticed. In the chaos of a miracle nobody could explain, that outside on the street below, a man in a black raincoat had already lifted his phone and was photographing the ambulance bay, the staff entrance, and the tired young nurse who'd just been sent home for 2 mandatory days of leave, because word had already started moving through channels far quieter than any hospital hallway that Kang Tae-jun was not, in fact, dead, and that whoever had kept him breathing through the night had just become the single most useful person in the city to anyone who wanted to hurt him. Naomi's 2 days off felt less like rest and more like waiting for a verdict she hadn't been told the charge for. She kept replaying it, his eyes opening, the way they'd found her before they found anyone else in the room. She told herself it meant nothing, that patients coming out of deep unconsciousness fixed on the last face nearby, that it was a reflex of a returning brain and not a recognition. She almost believed it. When she came back to the hospital, the whispers had already outpaced her. That's her. She heard a nurse murmur to another near the supply closet, not troubling to lower her voice much. The one who slept in his bed and woke the dead. I did CPR, technically, Naomi muttered under her breath, to no one, and kept walking. She'd been reassigned, quietly, deliberately, to the 7th floor, as far from the penthouse suite as the hospital's org chart allowed, which told her everything about how nervous her supervisors were about the story now circling the building. She told herself that was fine. She had bills that didn't care about miracles. She had a tuition portal that gave her exactly 11 more days. Kang Tae-jun's recovery, meanwhile, moved in the halting, humiliating way real recoveries do. Nothing like the instant, movie-clean waking the hospital gossip had already turned it into. His voice came back in pieces, ragged and unfamiliar to his own ears. Physical therapists made him grip a rubber ball for 10 minutes and called it progress. He hated every second of being watched failing at something as small as holding a spoon steady. His first full word, 3 days after waking, wasn't his sister's name or his lieutenant's. Naomi, he rasped, and Ji-hae and June exchanged a look neither of them explained to him. She's been reassigned, sir, June said carefully. Something in his face didn't argue, but something in it didn't accept it either. He didn't ask again out loud. He asked with a look that told June exactly what to go find out. June did more than find out. He investigated her financial records, her clean history, the shifts she picked up that no sane person picked up twice, let alone every week. He came back to Tae-jun with a folder and a warning in the same breath. She is a civilian. No connection to any of this. Your interest in her creates a vulnerability that didn't exist 3 days ago. The vulnerability already exists, Tae-jun said, voice still rough, still finding its old authority under the wreckage. The people who put a bullet in me at that shipyard know I survived. They'll be asking who kept me alive long enough to matter. If they find her before I do. He didn't finish it. He didn't need to. 4 days later, a black car pulled up beside Naomi as she walked toward her bus stop after a double shift, and the back door opened before she'd even fully registered the car was slowing down for her specifically. Mr. Kang requests your presence, June said, stepping out. It was phrased as a request. Nothing about his face suggested it was one. She almost ran. She almost laughed at herself for almost running. In the end she got in, because some part of her, the part that had sat with a dying stranger for 4 hours humming her grandmother's hymn, wanted, badly, to know if he remembered any of it, or if she'd imagined the whole thing out of exhaustion and hope. He was sitting up when she came in, dressed in a plain gray sweatshirt instead of a gown, thinner than she remembered from the one glimpse she'd had of his face days ago, but alert now in a way that made the room feel smaller. They told me you'd been moved, he said. I was. 7th floor. Regular patients. The kind who don't come with security details. I wanted to thank you. You don't need to. I did my job.
No.
He said it flatly, without performance. Everyone else on that floor was monitoring my death. You were the only one who talked to a man everyone else had already buried. His eyes held hers, unnervingly direct. Why did you stay? She thought about lying, about giving him the simple professional answer. She didn't. Because nobody should be alone at the end, even if they can't hear you. It felt wrong to just watch the numbers and say nothing. Something moved behind his expression that wasn't gratitude, or not only gratitude, something closer to a man encountering, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a kindness that hadn't been extracted from someone by his money or his name. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need you to understand it's not a request. It's a fact you're now entitled to know before it reaches you some other way. The people responsible for the shipyard know I survived. They will be looking for whoever kept me alive. That means you. Her stomach dropped, cold and immediate. What does that mean for me? It means June wants you disappeared. New city, new name, resources to make it seamless. He watched her reaction carefully. I told him that wasn't your decision to have made for you. Good, she said, sharper than she meant to, relief and anger tangled together. Because I've spent my whole life with people deciding what's safest for me without asking. My mother worked 3 jobs so nobody could tell her what she couldn't do with her own name. I'm not disappearing into a stranger's plan because it's convenient for your security detail. Then tell me what you want instead, he said, and something in the plainness of the question, no command in it, no assumption, startled her more than the threat had. She sat with that for a moment, weighing what she actually wanted against what fear was telling her to want. I want to keep my life, my job, my mother, my name. I want real information when something's happening, not a summary after the fact. And if you're going to have people watching my building, I want to know that too, instead of finding out by accident. Agreed. No hesitation. There's a rival organization. We call them the Serpent Line, though that's their name for themselves, not ours. They believe my recovery makes me unpredictable in a way my death wouldn't have been. A wounded man with something to protect is more dangerous to negotiate with than a dead one. They will look for leverage. You are the most visible leverage available to them right now. So what do? We, he repeated, like the word cost him something to say and was worth the cost. You keep working. You keep your shifts, your name, your mother's number and your phone. I increase quiet security around anything that matters to you, nothing visible enough to change your life more than it already has. And if that changes, if the threat becomes something closer than watching, I tell you before I act, not after. She studied him for a long moment. That's different from what I'd have guessed about you. I've spent my whole adult life solving every problem the same way, he said, quiet now, something almost like an admission in it. Force first, ask never. It has never once occurred to me, until 3 days ago, that the person I was protecting might have an opinion about how If you've made it this far and you're already invested in these two, go ahead and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. It helps more people find the story, and there's a lot more coming. That evening, alone in his office with the city spread out below the glass, June found him staring at nothing, humming something under his breath, tuneless and half-remembered, a melody he had no memory of ever learning. "Sir?" Tae-jun stopped, seeming almost surprised at himself. "It's nothing. A tune. I don't know where I picked it up." June didn't press it, though he filed it away the way he filed away everything. The humming, the way his employer's voice had changed talking about the nurse, the fact that in 11 years he had never once heard Kang Tae-jun ask anyone what they wanted instead of simply arranging it for them. "There's been movement," June said instead. Two men matching descriptions from the shipyard incident were seen near the hospital's staff entrance twice this week. Not close enough to act. Close enough to be seen. "Seen on purpose," Tae-jun said. "They want us to know they're watching before they move. It's a message before it's an attack." He looked out at the city, a long moment. Double the discreet watch on the 7th floor. Nothing that spooks them into moving faster than they already are. "And June, if anything gets closer to her than watching, I want to know the hour it happens. Not after I've already lost the chance to choose how we respond." "Understood." Tae-jun sat a long time after June left, turning over the strange fact that the deadliest era of his life had begun with a woman who'd simply refused to let a room go quiet, and that somewhere in the last 4 days, protecting her had become less like a liability calculation and more like the only decision he was certain, without hesitation, that he wanted to get right. The message came 4 days later, and it wasn't subtle. A single black orchid arrived at the 7th floor nurse's station, boxed, addressed to Naomi Carter by name. No card. No sender. The kind of gift meant to say only one thing: "We know exactly where to find you, and we know your name better than your own hospital does." She stood at the desk holding the box like it might detonate, and for the first time since this had started, the fear stopped being abstract. June had a car outside within the hour. "I'm not disappearing," she said before he could open his mouth, meeting him in the lobby with her coat already half on. "We agreed. You tell me what's happening, and we decide together. So tell me." "They're escalating faster than we predicted," June said. Tae-jun believes they're testing whether threatening you moves him faster than threatening him directly. He wants to meet with you before he decides anything. She went, this time without the same fear that had ridden with her the first time, replaced by something colder and more useful: anger. He was standing when she came in, steadier on his feet than she'd seen him, dressed like a man going back to work rather than a man recovering from one. But his face, when he saw the orchid box June had carried in behind her, went the kind of still that she'd learned by now meant something dangerous was being calculated behind it. "They sent that to make you afraid," he said. "So you'd ask me to make you disappear. So I'd stop being visible defending you and start looking like a man distracted by fear instead of a man defending his own." "Is it working?" she asked.
No.
Flat, immediate. "But I do need to end this properly, not with more men watching more doors. I need to meet them." "That's insane. You're barely off a ventilator." "Strength isn't only in the body." His eyes held hers, steady. "They think I'm too wounded to move against them directly. I intend to prove that wrong, and I intend to do it without you disappearing from your own life to make it easier for me." "Then let me actually understand what I'm agreeing to," she said. "Not the summary. All of it." So he told her, plainly, without softening it for her comfort, the way she'd asked him to from the start. The Serpent Line believed his recovery made him unpredictable rather than weakened, and unpredictable men were expensive to negotiate around. They wanted him distracted, fractured, spending his attention protecting a nurse instead of running his territory. A private meeting, brokered through channels both sides trusted, was the only way to close the opening they believed they'd found, by showing them, directly, that the opening didn't exist. "And if it goes wrong?" she asked. "Then it goes wrong in a room with men I've spent 11 years learning to read, not in an alley outside your building where I have no control at all." He said it without drama, a plain fact laid beside another plain fact. "I would rather risk myself in a room I understand than risk you in a city I can't watch every corner of." She didn't argue further because there wasn't an argument that beat that math, only a fear that didn't care about math at all. Come back, she said finally, quieter than she meant to. I intend to. The meeting took place at a restaurant on the river the following night, a room both sides had used before for exactly this kind of conversation, where violence was expensive precisely because it was rare. Tae-jun went in with June and two men. Naomi waited at the penthouse, pacing between windows, unable to read, unable to sit, counting the hours the way she used to count compressions, steady, mechanical, a rhythm to hold on to so the fear didn't take the whole room. He came back just after midnight, walking on his own. A cut above one eyebrow, a torn shoulder seam, but upright and alive, and when she rushed to him with a medical kit already in hand before he'd said a word, visibly relieved to see her rushing toward him rather than away. It's done, he said, sinking onto the sofa, while she cleaned the cut with hands that had gone steady the moment there was work to do with them. They've agreed to the boundary. You're not a target anymore. I made it costly for them to consider otherwise. What did that cost you? Less than losing you would have. He watched her work, quiet for a moment. You're a good nurse. I'm a great nurse, she corrected, and something in his face eased at the ordinary, stubborn correction, proof, maybe, that whatever this had done to her, it hadn't taken the parts of her that were entirely her own. He reached up and covered her hand with his, stopping her mid-motion.
Naomi.
When I was in that dark, before any of this, I don't remember much. I remember a voice, talking about a bridge, about gold lights. I held on to that without knowing what it was, or whose it was, until I woke up and found out. Her breath caught. You heard that? I don't know how. I only know it was the first thing that felt like a way back. His thumb moved once, slowly, over her knuckles. Stay with me, you said. I don't know if you remember saying it. I say it to every patient whose heart stops under my hands, she said, quieter now. It's habit. I didn't think. I know, he said. That's what made it real. You weren't performing kindness for me. You didn't know I'd ever wake up to hear it. She sat with that a long moment, the weight of it settling somewhere she hadn't let anything settle in longer than she could remember. I still have a life, she said finally. My mother. My certification. 11 more days on a deadline, I still haven't made. None of that goes away, because you're better now. I know, he said. I'm not asking it to. I'm asking if there's room in the life you're keeping for whatever this is becoming. He held her gaze, steady, no command in it at all, exactly the way he'd learned to ask instead of decide. Not tonight. Not as an answer you have to give me now. Just room. She looked at him a long moment, the man who'd been declared gone by every machine in that hospital, and the man sitting in front of her now, asking rather than assuming, for maybe the first time in his adult life. There's room, she said finally. We go slow. My deadline still matters. My mother still comes first. You don't get to decide what I do with my own name just because you paid to keep it safe. Understood, he said, and meant it in a way she was starting to believe he meant most things now. Outside the window, gold lights traced the bridge the way she'd once described them to a man who couldn't hear her, and now, faintly, under his breath, without seeming to notice he was doing it, Tae-jun began to hum the same half-remembered tune she'd once sung over a heart that had forgotten how to beat on its own. She didn't tell him what it was. She let him have it anyway, proof, small and wordless, that some things reach a person even when every machine in the room insists they can't. If this story reached you the way it reached him, that's exactly why we make these. Tell us in the comments which moment hit hardest. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And remember, sometimes the smallest kindness is the only thing loud enough to reach someone the whole world has already given up on.